This conference will now be recorded.
Vagbhadacharya madhyamam asmadacharya paryandam vande guru paramparam ragadirogan sadatanushaktan asheshakaya prasrutan asheshan autsukyamoha aradidan jakhana yo purva vaidyaya namostu tasmai. So very good evening to all of you. First of all, let me express my regret in the break which we had for almost 2 months. Sorry for that. Anyway, we will try to make up whatever we have lost. We are in Dravyadi Vidnyani. So I think as we had a very big gap in between, I'll just read the chapter up to the point where we concluded our last session. अधादो द्रव्यादिविज्ञानीयम् अध्यायं व्याख्यास्यामः इति स्माहुरात्रेयादयो महर्षयः. द्रव्यमेव रसादीनां श्रेष्ठं ते हि तदाश्रयाः. पञ्चभूतात्मकं तत्तु क्ष्मामधिष्ठाय जायते अम्बुयोन्यग्निपवननभसां समवायतः तन्निर्वृत्तिर्विशेषश्च व्यपदेशस्तु भूयसा. व्यपदेशस्तु भूयसा. तस्मान्नैगरसं द्रव्यं भूतसङ्घातसम्भवात् नैगदोषास्ततो रोगाः. It is up to that point that we discussed. Naigadoshastado rogaha. And we discussed, I think, especially in our last session, we had a very detailed discussion about that tasman naigarasam dravyam bhuta sanghada sambhavad naigadoshastado rogaha. Up to that point we discussed in detail. Now the next point is tatra vyakto rasa smritaha. Tatra vyakto rasa smritaha. Tatra vyaktaha rasaha smritaha. Tatra means here in our adhikarana, in our prakaranam, in this context, what is the context? We are discussing Dravyadi Vidnyaniya. So there are many things of which we started with rasa. Dravyameva rasadinam shreshta. So we are slowly coming to the padarthas. In this context, these are the padarthas. That means the rasa, guna, vipaka, virya, prabhava. All these are the padarthas in this present context. The categories what we are going to discuss. So as the situation demanded, we were discussing something extra. That is the nega doshas tado rogaha. That is an important point actually. But in the first look, it may look like, it may seem, it seems like, okay, it is out of context, but it was not so. That is why we discussed it in detail in our last session. Now we are coming back to the core areas, like what is rasam, what is, all these things are taken for detailed discussion one after the other. So here we find tatra vyaktaha rasaha smritaha. Tatra, in this context, or in a dravya, fine, that is also the platform on which the discussions are going on. In dravya, vyaktaha rasaha smritaha. Vyaktaha rasaha smritaha. Whatever is vyaktam, that should be understood as rasam. That should be understood as rasam. So we are taking one padartha into consideration, into discussion here, that is rasam. So we should have an idea what is rasam. Rasam is an indriyartha. Rasam is an indriyartha. Rasanartho rasaha. The artha of rasanendriyam is known as rasam. There are many other ideas about rasa which will show the different aspects about the principle called rasa, like rasyade aswadyade iti rasaha. That is how that word comes. Rasyade aswadyade. So that aswadanam here, especially in the context of rasanendriyam, it means the act of tasting. So a dravya is subjected to the act of tasting because of some principle which is there residing in that dravya, and that principle is known as rasa. Rasyade aswadyade iti rasaha. In Rasavaisheshikam we will find a definition. Rasalakshanam aswadaha. Rasalakshanam aswadaha. 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 Ruji. That is the lakshana of rasa. Rasa lakshanam aswadaha. So aswadanam itself is given as the lakshana of rasa. So something which can be tasted with the rasanendriya is known as rasa. And that rasam, how do we perceive it? Rasam vidyad nipadena. Rasam vidyad nipadena. While that principle in the form of dravya falls down onto the tongue or descends and touches the tongue, that means the artha is coming to the contact with the indriya, immediately you perceive the rasa. Rasam vidyad nipadena. Rasam vidyad nipadena. So tatra we already saw that bhuda sanghada sambhavad na egarasam dravyam. That means there is potentially there are all the 6 rasas in a dravya. So rasam vidya nipadena, when the dravya comes to a contact with the rasanendriya, if there are all the 6 rasas in that dravya, how will you appreciate the rasa of the dravya? Which one will be identified as the rasa? That is a question. And in this point, that question is being answered. That is tatra vyaktaha rasaha. So in that contact of the indriya and its artha, whatever is vyakta, that is known as rasa here. So there is obviously there are questions. Oh, there are you mean that is there are vyakta indriyartham. So obviously that implies that there can be avyakta also, which we will discuss in the next line. At this point, the idea which is getting clarified is that during that indriya artha samyoga, even though there are potentials of various rasas in a single dravya, whatever is vyakta, is known as its rasa. Tatra vyaktaha rasaha smritaha. Then, as I mentioned, obviously there are questions arising out of jitnasa. There can be many other questions. So the question is, if it is not vyakta, but still we can perceive it, maybe alpa vyakta or something like that, what will that principle be named or called? So in the next bhaga of the sloka, we find avyakto nurasa kinjidande vyaktopi cheshyate. Avyakto nurasa kinjidande vyaktopi cheshyate. Avyaktaha anurasaha kinjid ande vyaktaha api cha ishyate. Avyaktaha anurasaha kinjid ande vyaktaha api cha ishyate. Now we will see what is the text trying to explain, or the author trying to explain. First part of the explanation, avyaktaha anurasaha. Avyaktaha anurasaha. That means tatra vyaktaha rasaha smritaha avyaktaha anurasaha. So here we find a new term. The term is anurasam. Anurasam. What is anurasam? Avyaktaha anurasaha. In that dravya nipatam, rasam vidyam nipadena. So when that rasa or rasayukta dravya is coming into contact with the rasanendriya, vyaktaha is rasa, avyaktaha. So there can be a rasa which is avyaktaha, not very clear. Kinjid vyaktaha, that we are coming in the next line. Here it is avyaktaha, na vyaktaha, avyaktaha, which is not clear at all. Then obviously there is a question. Then if it is not clear, how are you going to perceive it? Or what is the supporting factor to substantiate its presence? Because it is avyaktam. Then how do you perceive such a thing, or how do you comment about such a principle? We will find it later. So here something which is avyakta during aswadana. Avyakta during aswadana. We don't identify as one among the madhuradi shadrasa. That is avyakta. And that is known as anurasam. So it is perceived as some sort of a avyakta rasam. So it is not absence. It is not absence, but you are not able to, or you fail to make out it as one among the madhuradi shadrasa. Something is there after the first perception of the vyakta rasa. Something is there, but I could not make out whether it is madhura, whether it is amla, whether it is tikta or kashaya. So that way is this word used, avyaktaha. Then next part of the explanation, what is that? Kinjid vyaktaha api anurasaha. Kinjid vyaktaha. There is a very dominant vyakta rasa, but kinjid means a little bit. Little bit. So something which is vyakta, not clearly as the rasa, vyakta rasa, but there is a presence which is so feeble, kinchid vyaktaha. That is also known as anurasa. That is also known as anurasa. We will come to some examples later. Then the third part, what I am doing is, I am explaining the shloka in the most conventional way. There are differences in opinion, there are differences in styles also. The way in which this shloka or these 1.5 lines are explained, there are different styles also. We will come to it later. So conventionally, the third part of the shloka comes like Ande vyaktaha api anurasaha. Ande vyaktaha api anurasaha. That means the sense of rasa which is perceived ande, towards the end of the aswadanam, you have the feeling of a rasa which is different from the vyakta rasa which was perceived immediately after the contact with the dravya, contact of the rasanendriya with the dravya. So that andam means last. That is what the most or at least the best meaning. There are many other meanings can be possible for andam, but at least in this context, one potential meaning is the end. So that is also known as anurasa. That is also known as anurasa. So when we talk about avyakta rasa, the first example that may pop up in our minds is the description of the Gangambu, isn't it? Gangambu is explained as Jivanam Tarpanam Hridyam Radi Buddhi Prabodhanam Tanu Avyaktarasam Mrishtam Shidam Leghu Amrudopamam Gangambu, isn't it? So there Tanu Avyaktarasam. Actually, this Avyaktarasata is a point of discussion. As you all know, Charaka dedicates one entire chapter for this, the 26th chapter in Sutrasthanam called Atraya Bhadrakapi. So there, I think we are attending some sort of a seminar. And there are many presentations or many opinions proposed by different scholars. And one among the many opinions or proposals was Ashtau rasaha idi badisho dhamargavaha. Dhamargava badishaha, one scholar, he has a proposal about the number of rasas. That is Ashtau rasaha. Ashtau rasaha. Which are the proposed 8 rasas? Madhura amla lavana kadu tikta kashaya kshara avyaktaha. So one among the 8 rasas as proposed by Dhamargava Badisha is Avyakta. But in his concluding note, we can find sage Atreya rejecting that proposal. No, this cannot be taken into consideration. Of course, for rejecting the Kshara, there are specific reasons which I am not going to discuss at this point of time because our area of interest is limited to Avyakta Rasa. So Atreya tells, what is his note? He is saying, Avyakti bhava tu rasanam prakritau bhavati anirase Anurasa samanyvideva dravye. Avyakti bhavastu rasanam prakritau bhavati anirase anurasa samanyvideva dravye. So such certain options he is giving. The first one is a very categorical statement. What is that? Rasanam avyakti bhavaha prakritau bhavati. So the avyakti bhava of rasa happens in its prakriti, rasa prakriti. What is rasa prakriti? Rasa prakriti is jalam. Rasa prakriti is jalam. But interestingly, we all know that okay, the jalam here is not the jalam what we use for day-to-day use around. It is that rasam which is immediately after its formation by the samyoga of rasa tanmatras. The jalam which is formed immediately after the samyoga of rasa tanmatras. And this jalam is explained. Maybe I think even in the context of this Gangambu, you should understand it in that way. Immediately we find that hidahidatve tadbhuyo deshagalavapekshade. The same thing is happening. Soon after the formation of that rasa, the prakrita or the rasa prakriti of that jalam, certain types of vidaham, agnipagam is happening in the dravya, in the rasa, sorry, in the jala, which brings particular type of rasa into it. So that is what we see around, and that can change or that can be influenced by the desha and kala. Hidahitatve tadbhuyo deshakalavapekshade is a broad note. Precisely here we can find that okay, that vidaham or the agnipagam which is responsible for the resultpatti is taking soon after that formation, and accordingly there will be some sort of an inclination for this jala towards some particular rasa. So that is the point proposed by Atreya regarding the avyakti bhava. So it cannot be considered as a seventh or eighth rasa, because it is nothing specifically identified as different from the six with any particular lakshana or with any particular karma. That rasa cannot be considered as a seventh rasa or eighth rasa. Then next he is proposing the word anurasa. Anurase anurasa samanvideva dravye avyakti bhavaha bhavati. So in anurasa you may feel, you may propose, you may identify this rasa avyakti bhavam, but again that avyakti bhavata is not different from the six rasas proposed. Similarly, anurasa samanvide dravye, you may find an avyakta rasam. So that point is also valid and important, because anurasa samanvide dravye means all the dravyas need not necessarily have anurasa. If it was so, if the case was so, definitely anurasa should also be considered as among one of the padarthas, like rasam, viryam, gunam, viryam, vipagam, prabhavam. Another principle will be anurasam. So then it will be rasam, anurasam, vipagam, viryam, prabhavam, etc. But all the dravyas need not necessarily have anurasa. So that is why it is just explained as some sort of an annexure to the main body of rasa sankalpa. I hope the idea is clear. Anurasam is explained in that way only. Anu, the word itself means something which follows. Anuyayi, anugami, anupanam. So something which follows or comes together along with. So anurasa is a rasa which follows the pradhana rasa or the vyakta rasa, or it can be a very minute form or unmanifest form, or a very weak or a feeble manifestation of a rasa. Actually, in some of the textbooks, we will find a word used as anurasa. That is also an interesting usage. Anurasa. Anurasa is used as anurasa. Anu shows the tiny nature, the minuteness of presentation. So that way, anurasam is anurasam as well. Okay, fine. So, as I mentioned in the case of that jala, in every dravya, it is because of the particular type, the specific type of agnipaga or vidaha, which is responsible for the manifestation of its rasa. So actually, when we say that, okay, tasman naigarasam dravyam, it means all the rasas can be manifested in a dravya. All the type of agnipagas can happen in a dravya, but all these agnipagas need not be of equal strength, equal capacity. So what happens? That particular paga which is responsible for a particular rasa, which is the strongest among all, will bring that particular rasa into the fore. And accordingly, that dravya will be known to have that particular rasa vyakta, rasa proper. Sometimes two rasas may be equally predominant. There can be three rasas predominant. We have seen many dravyas like that, isn't it? Rasona, which lacks only one rasa, all the five are available. In Haritagi, we find, okay, there are five rasas. There may be many dravyas which are where two dravyas, two rasas are predominant, three rasas are predominant, four rasas. If you search through our Nikhandus, you will find many dravyas with more than one Vyakta rasas. And also we will find many Anurasas. So, Kinchid Vyakta, Ande Vyakta, and the third option regarding the possibility of Anurasa is Avyakta. I already mentioned that, okay, there are many other styles of explaining this Anurasam. There can be different aspects regarding this. Interestingly, when we find Ashtanga Sangraham, its Hindu commentary, actually the point which is raised by Hindu in his commentary is very important. It's very important. It goes like this. Tatra cha dravye rasanendriyagrahyah vyaktah sphudah rasa shabdena uktah. That means tatra vyaktah rasah. Then yascha rasah yasmin dravye anurasattvena uktah. I am repeating. Yaha cha rasaha yasmin dravye anurasattvena uktaha. Whichever rasa is explained in a dravya as its anurasa, saha, that anurasa, pradhana rasena abhibhogatvad, as it is masked by the Vyakta rasa, avyakta eva tishtadi, remains as avyakta, continues to remain as avyakta. Then how do we understand about it? That is the contribution. That is a very specific observation of Hindu. Pradhana rasa vijadiya karya kartritvad tasya sabhavaha anumiyade agamacha. Pradhana rasa vijadiya karya kartritvad tasya sabhavaha anumiyade. There are certain dravyas in which the karma done in a particular context cannot be explained by the pradhana rasa, but only by a rasa which accompanies the pradhana rasa, but which is avyakta. And the acharyas, the scholars, the ancient seers have identified this and documented it as agamam, mentioning it as anurasam. So due to these 2 points, that means pradhana rasa vijadiya karya kartritvad agamadcha tasya sabhavaha anumiyate. It is an anumanam. It is an anumanam. So there are some vague ideas which can be even, I think, clarified in real life situations with the examples. Otherwise, this always remains as a vague area or a shady area. Okay, so that is about the basic idea of anurasam. But still, the idea proposed by Hindu in this rasa, in the Ashtanga Sangraha Vyakhya may be summarized into very crisp points, which is important. One is anurasa is staying masked by the pradhana rasa. 1 point. Number 2, its presence is inferred by its karma, which is different from the karma of the pradhana rasa. Number 3, it is accepted and documented by aptas as agama. And as the 4th point, Hindu proposes that whichever rasa is becoming vyakta at the end, after the perception of the pradhana rasa, that also can be considered as anurasa. So 4 points in Hindu's commentary, which will help you in understanding and explaining this concept of anurasa properly. Charaka also tries to explain it in a different way. For those who are interested in it, I will just bring that 2 lines from the Charaka Samhita. It is like this: Vyakta shushkasya cha adau cha raso dravyasya lakshyate. Vyakta shushkasya cha adau cha raso dravyasya lakshyate. That means dravyasya rasaha lakshyate. How vyaktaha lakshyate. It is very evident. And 2 things. Shushkasya cha. That means either in a fresh dravya or in a dry dravya. In a ardra dravya or shushka dravya, adau or at the end, andam. That is how Charaka is explaining it in the 26th chapter. Adau or andam, which is very clearly presenting, very clearly manifested. Then according to Charaka, that should be considered as rasa. Vibaryayena anurasa. So whether it is adi or andam, whether it is shushka dravyam or ardra dravyam, if it is not clearly manifested, it is avyaktam, or kinchit vyaktam, then it should be considered as anurasam. This is the uh, idea which Charaka is documenting in the 26th chapter. There are some other usages as well. In, for example, in if you look into Rasavasheshika, you will find another term called Uparasa. Uparasam. That is also Anurasam actually. Uh, Rasavasheshika, as you know, written by the Bhadanda Nagarjuna. So Bhadanda Nagarjuna is trying to explain why there are differences in one rasa itself. For example, if you take Madhura, there are different types of Madhuras. If you take Amla, there are different types of Amlas. So how does it happen? So he's trying to explain it, and then he identifies many contributing factors for that. How the same rasa can or getting this sort of different types of presentations. Many things like Tivramanda Vishesham, Aswada Vishesham, Samsarga Vishesham, Dravya Vishesham, Guna Vishesham. So many things are identified by Bhadanda Nagarjuna, and one among these many is Uparasa Vishesham. So Uparasa Vishesham makes this Aswada Vishesham in the same rasa itself. So there he uses the term Uparasa for explaining this idea of Anurasa as explained by Vakpada or Charaka. Okay. So one important point that we have to understand is like rasa, guna or virya, anurasa need not be a factor which will be present invariably in all dravyas. That should be kept in our mind. Okay. Then in the textbook, I think we will move forward. We find Gurvadayo guna dravye पृथिव्यादौ रसाश्रये रसेषु व्यपदिश्यन्ते साहचर्योपचारतः. That is the next shloka. गुर्वादयो गुणाद्रव्ये पृथिव्यादौ रसाश्रये रसेषु व्यपदिश्यन्ते साहचर्योपचारतः. You see the words, the padam first. Gurvadayah gunaha dravye पृथिव्यादौ रसाश्रये रसेषु व्यपदिश्यन्ते साहचर्योपचारतः. रसाश्रये पृथिव्यादौ द्रव्ये गुर्वादयः गुणाः, ये गुर्वादयः गुणाः सन्ति साहचर्योपचारतः रसेषु व्यपदिश्यन्ते. साहचर्योपचारतः रसेषु व्यपदिश्यन्ते. That is its अन्वय. So let us see what the author is trying to explain. Point is very simple. There are gunas in the dravya like guru, lakhu, ushnam, shidam, like many gunas are there in a dravya. And in the textbook, you may find these gunas are explained as owned by rasas. Like Madhura is Guru, or Amla is Ushna, Lavana is Snigdha, like that. So this is a technique for the sake of easiness of explanation, Vagbhara says, I have used this technique. What is the technique in it, or what is wrong in it, or what is the logic behind it? There are many questions. So he is explaining that I have used one technique while writing this textbook. The technique is the gunas which are really owned by dravyas are attributed to the rasas. And the logic behind this sort of an attribution is known as sahajaryopacharam. Is known as sahajaryopacharam. So it is a simple concept. But for the sake of technical perfection, Vagbhara is explaining the way in which it is used in the textbook. What is it? You see, Dravya is the ashraya for the Guru, Laghu, Adi, Guna. The same Dravya is the ashraya for the Shadrasas. So Guruvadi Gunas are residing in Dravya, Madhuradi Shadrasas are residing in the Dravya. So this situation of two principles, that means Guruvadi Guna and the Madhuradi Rasa, two principles residing in the same Adhikarana is technically known as Samanadhikaranyam, Samanadhikaranyam or Sahacharyam. Is known as Samanadhikaranyam, Samana Adhikaranatvam, Samanadhikaranyam or Sahacharyam. Saha, Sahacharati, moves together, resides together, staying together. Sahacharaha, tasya bhavaha Sahacharya. So here Guruvadi Gunas and Madhuradi Rasas, they are having Sahacharyam, Samanadhikaranyam in Dravya. So when that sort of a Sahacharyam is established, Samanadhikaranyam is established, you can ascribe or attribute the gunas, Guruvadi Gunas, as owned by the rasas, as owned by the rasa, Shadrasas. So it is not actually so. Actually, it is owned by Dravya. But because of the Sahajarya, we are using it like that. So actually, we are doing some sort of an aropana. Avidyamanasya ashrayashrayi bhavasya aropaha. Attribution or ascription of a non-existing ashrayashrayi bhavam. That is known as upacharam. That attribution of a non-existing ashrayi bhavam is known as upacharam. And an upacharam which is done because of the sahacharyam which is existing between them is known as sahacharyopachara. Upacharam which is done based on a sahacharyam which is existing between these two, that means rasa and guna, it is known as sahacharyopachara. So by virtue of this sahajaryopacharam, the gunas of the dravyas are attributed to the rasas, explained as the gunas of the rasas. Why should we explain such a silly thing in this much with this much description? That can be a question. That can be a question. See, people, especially the Vaidyas, operate primarily based on the rasas of the Dravya. Primarily operates based on the rasa. It's a fact. When we explain a dosha, tatra ruksho laghu shida ghara sukshmaschalo anilaha. So primarily the operations revolve around the rukshadi gunas. And when we try to connect the doshas with dravyas, it is primarily done by virtue of the rasas. Tatraadya marudam gulandi trayastikta kabham kashaya pitta madhura pitta anyetu kurvade. And that attribution again is the fundamental platform on which vriddhi samare sarvesham vipariyaya viparyeya is evolved. So the use of gunas is very frequent, and that use of gunas has got close relation in the selection of rasas. So we require some sort of a generalization of rasas based on their gunas. While we are addressing a situation of a Vadakopa, we are understanding the Vadakopa in terms of its gunas. Then we decide or we select which rasa should be used, whether it should be Madhura, whether it should be Amla or Lavana. That will be obviously related to the gunas which was causing the Vadakopa. Accordingly, the suitable rasa will be selected. Okay, I will go for Madhura rasa or I will go for Lavana rasa, which is again based on the gunas of that particular rasas. Actually, rasas do not have guna. It is the dravya which is having the guna. But for the sake of easiness of business, we attribute those gunas to the rasas directly. So in the textbook, we will find n number of situations where rasas are advised to be used based on their gunas. So Vagbhada prefers not to be technically wrong. That is why he is explaining that, you see, in my textbook, I have used this concept of Sahajaryopacharam, and it is based on that Sahajaryopacharam that these rasas are explained as having Guruvadi Gunas. So it is just for a technical purpose that this concept of Sahajaryopacharam is explained. So I think we have already touched our target time. Remaining portion we will explain in our next session. As I mentioned in one of our previous session, I do not know whether I am making the very simple Dravyadi Vidnyani so complex, but I think we are not learning for not for appearing any examinations or not for getting any marks, and we don't have any specific syllabus. Okay, this much portion should be covered in this much hours. So I thought, okay, we will go to the maximum depth, maximum understanding, so that at least some insight will be there about all these ideas what are explained in the textbook. And if we are not going through these details now, when will we go to these details? So I think we will go in a slow pace with all these things. If you have a different opinion, please tell me, we will make it fast. Okay. So with that, we conclude. Remaining portions we will see in our next session. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir, definitely. Thank you so much, sir, uh, for today's session. Uh, shall we take one or two questions, sir, or shall we conclude today, sir?
If we have a couple of questions, we will see, but I think generally there will not be much questions. Anyway, we will see. If there are a couple of one, we will definitely see.
Yeah. Already one question is popping. How can we identify a rasa of nibid dravya? How will we differentiate rasa and anurasa of nibid or compact dravya like metals?
Yeah, that's a very expected question whenever we are discussing about these things. How are you going to understand the rasa of a stone piece or a metal piece like that, or even a piece of cotton, isn't it? So I think we will discuss it, because I think we have just started that area, how these rasas are perceived and everything. So please keep that question live till the end of this chapter, and still if it is there remaining, definitely we will discuss. Otherwise, I am pretty sure that this point will be automatically covered with our following sessions. Okay.
Yes, sir, definitely. We will keep in our minds.
Yeah. We will keep the question live all throughout, and I'm pretty sure that it will be covered in our coming sessions.
Yes, sir. So we will conclude our today's session and meet on next Thursday at 8 p.m.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Shubharatri to all of you.
Shubharatri.
सर रसाचं आणि